This pair of error messages frequently confuses beginners. The no such file or directory in this location on line 15 is particularly confusing. The file name being in bold type distracts attention from the important information which is in the first half of the error message. Fail to open stream means that the file couldn't be opened for one reason or another, and it doesn't refer to your web page but to the include file that's listed right at the beginning. In this case, it's require includes/top.php. The second error message tells you the consequence of not being able to open the include file. It's a fatal error in this case because require was used. When require can't find an include file, it gives up attempting to display the rest of the page. And this reference to include_path is where PHP looks for include files by default. It's normally defined in the PHP configuration, and it can be tricky for beginners to change because the setup is slightly different depending on the server's operating system. So I recommend that you keep things simple by using a path relative to the current document. So let's go and have a look at our page in the editing program. And there on line 15 was the include command using require, and it includes/top.php. And if we look over here in the includes folder, it should be pagetop.php. Now I've deliberately changed the name, but even if you've tested a page successfully locally, you might get this sort of problem if you forget to upload an include file or if you accidentally delete it on your remote server. So let's save that and go back to the browser and reload the page. Now that we've got the correct page, it's loading correctly. But if we scroll down to the bottom, we see that we've got another pair of error messages. This time it's referring to include. Now let's just see the difference. If I right-click and view page source and scroll down to the bottom of the source code, there are those error messages, but the rest of the code has been included. And it's very important because it's including the script that runs the navigation menu. So if we go back, even though the footer isn't being displayed, the navigation menu is working correctly. So that's the difference between using include and require. Fail to open stream means that the PHP engine couldn't open an include file. Normally it's because the file doesn't exist or the path to the include file is wrong. Always use a path that's relative to the current document. You can't use one that's relative to the site route. If you've checked the path and it's correct, make sure the necessary permissions are set on both the include file and on the folder it's located in. One final point, you can't use include or require to include a file that's located on a different domain. The ability to include remote files is disabled by default. It's an important security measure because you normally have no control over other sites, and incorporating unknown content directly into a web page is highly risky. One error message that's notorious for causing many hours of frustration is headers already sent. Let's see what the problem is and how to fix it. I'm going to select a couple of flowers in this page here and then click the Add to Basket button. And I've got an error message at the beginning. This page uses a PHP session and session variables. And the warning is session start, cannot send session cache limiter, headers have already been sent. What headers already sent means is that some output has already been sent to the browser, so no changes can be made to the HTTP headers because they were already sent with the original output. As a result, the session can't be started. More important, without a session, you can't create or use session variables. I should point out that XAMPP on Windows suppresses this problem through a configuration directive called output_buffering. I've added a .htaccess file to the chapter 07/07_05 folder to reset the buffer to 0, because that's the way it is in MAMP on a Mac and also in most live web servers. And this is another error message that I find rather misleading. It identifies the error as being on line 2 here. So if we go to our editing program and have a look at line 2, there's nothing wrong with it there. Session_start, parentheses, semicolon. That's exactly what we need. So let's go back and look at that error message again. And the actual detail is here in parentheses. Output started at, and then the file location. The file name is order.php. Then after that colon is the number 1. That's the line number where the output started, and that's where we need to look. So if we go back to our editing program, line 1 looks okay, but actually there's one little space there before the opening PHP tag, and that space creates output. It sends output to the browser, and it means you can't change the HTTP headers. Might also have an extra line in there. That would do exactly the same thing. What we need to do is to get rid of that, then save the page. And if we go back to our browser and we go back to the previous page and click Add to Basket, the problem has gone. But this problem doesn't happen only with sessions. It also happens with the header function, which redirects a page. And I've modified this page from the previous chapter so that the Confirm Order button down here redirects the user to another page. So let's click that. We've got the same cannot modify header information problem again. Headers already sent, and it says line 20. So if we look on line 20 in order.php, there is the header function, which is redirecting. There is nothing wrong with it there at all. But if you look up here on line 14, we're including an external file, includes/order_helpers.php. Let's go back to the browser. In the parentheses here, output started at, and that particular location, and it's actually in order_helpers.php on line 24 that the problem is happening. So let's look at that particular page. Let's open order_helpers.php. And if you look at line 24, there's nothing on it. So you might think, well, what's the problem there? But here is the closing PHP tag on that include file on line 21. And we've got 3 blank lines, and that is sending output before we get to the header function on line 20 of order.php. There are 2 ways to fix this. One of them is to remove all of the blank lines until we're right up next to the closing PHP tag. Then if we save that page, go back to the browser, go back 1 page, we need to resubmit the form. Yes, we're happy to do that. And this time, if we click Confirm Order, we're correctly redirected to the other page. Now, the other way in which you can fix this might seem rather strange, but it's actually to remove that closing PHP tag. If you have a file that contains only PHP, you can leave out the closing PHP tag. You can even add in extra lines after the missing closing PHP tag. If I save that, go back in the browser, I'll go back to that previous page, confirm my form resubmission, and then click Confirm Order, and it redirects correctly. And the point about this is that if you have a PHP page, an include page, that contains only PHP code, it's a good idea to leave out the closing PHP tag to avoid the problem with headers already sent. The headers already sent message confuses people because they tend to look in the wrong place for its cause. The key is to look for where the output starts, and it's buried in the error message. Let's just reintroduce that error. Let's put in that closing PHP tag and leave those extra lines in there and save that file. Go back, refresh the form, and click Confirm Order. We've got that message. The problem is not here on line 20 of order.php. It's actually here in the parentheses. It says output started at, then the name of the file. You find the file name at the end, order_helpers.php, a colon, and it's that line number that tells you where the output started, and that's where you need to look. The error messages in this page refer to both an undefined variable and an undefined index. The first one should be fairly easy to understand. It means that the PHP code is trying to use a variable that's not been defined. In other words, a variable that doesn't exist. The name of the variable is given here. It's season with an uppercase S. The error message omits the $sign. And it tells us the problem is on line 56, and the undefined index is also on line 56, so that indicates that the two might actually be related. So let's have a look at the code in our editing program. Scroll down to line 56, and there on line 56, using features with, in square brackets, season with an uppercase S. And if we go a little bit further up in the page, we can see that on line 34, season is defined with a lowercase s. So that's the problem. It's case sensitivity. PHP variables are case sensitive. This was with a lowercase s. If you try to use it with an uppercase s, PHP regards it as a completely different variable. So if we change that and save the page, go back to the browser and reload the page, both problems disappear. And the reason for that is that season was the array key for features, and the word index is just another name for an array key. And we can test that by changing this variable to a string. So let's change it to a string winter with an uppercase W, save that, and reload in the browser. And this time it tells us that it's an undefined index winter. If we go back to the editing program and change that to a lowercase w, that is an index, an array key that does exist. And if we reload that in the browser, the problem disappears. Now, sometimes people forget to put in the quotation marks around the array key of an associative array. So if we save that, we've got features winter does exist. Let's just see what happens when we reload that in the browser. And what it tells us is use of an undefined constant, winter, assumed winter in quotes. It does display the correct tagline, but it gives us this error message. Now, if your server doesn't display error messages, of course you won't see that. There would be no problem. But you should always make sure that you put array indexes or array keys in quotes, because you can get this problem and it might break down in future. There is another scenario where you might see a warning about undefined variables, and this one is a bit more difficult to troubleshoot. Let's go to the Build a Bouquet page and select a couple of flowers. Then go to Add a Basket. Everything works fine on this page. I'll move away to another page, our designers, and then click View My Order. And this time we get a notice, undefined variable price in order.php on line 89. And if we go to the editing program and open order.php and line 89, there is price being used. And if we scroll up in the page, there is the price array being defined there. Now, the problem is that the first time I went to that page, price worked. The second time I went to that page, price was undefined. And the reason is, the problem is that the price array is defined inside this if block here. And this if block runs only if post bouquet has been set. In other words, it only runs when the form from the bouquet page has been submitted. So when you come back to the page, this price array isn't defined. And this is a problem which is known as a variable being out of scope. And the problem is solved by selecting that, deleting it or cutting it to your clipboard and pasting it outside of that decision-making block. So if we just tidy things up a little bit and move it back, you can see that it's no longer inside that block. If we save the page and go back to the browser, this time we reload the page and everything works fine. So Error messages about an undefined variable or undefined index usually mean there's a spelling mistake in the name of the variable or the name of an array key. PHP variables and array keys are case sensitive. To avoid this sort of problem, it's a good idea to adopt a consistent naming convention and stick to it. When you see an error message about an undefined constant, it means that you've forgotten to wrap an array key in quotes. When error messages are turned off, your page will display normally, but you should never ignore error messages. Your page might work today, but a future update to PHP could cause it to fail. The most difficult type of undefined variable error to understand is one that works sometimes, but not always. And this is when the variable is defined inside a decision-making block. Moving the definition outside the decision-making block solves the problem. This is one of the most enigmatic error messages you're likely to encounter in PHP. Fortunately, it's easy to deal with. Don't worry about this expecting identifier, t-string or variable and all that. All you need to take notice of is this T in caps and white space and the line where it occurs. It's on line 19, so let's go to the editing program and look at it. And the problem is that this is a double quoted string and inside it is an associative array element. You can't do it just like that. You need to wrap the associative array element in a pair of curly braces. So curly brace before the $sign and a curly brace after the closing square bracket. Save the page, go back to the browser, and the problem is sorted. The associative array element is now displayed correctly. Just one little thing about that. Don't try to make your code look a little bit tidier by putting a space after that curly brace and a space at the end here. Let's just see what happens. Save the page, reload the browser. We get T in caps and white space again. At least in this case, the white space does make a little bit of sense. The problem is the white space between the curly brace and the $sign. The white space at the end doesn't particularly matter, but it's the white space here. But the best solution is to remove the white space around those curly braces, save, and the associative array element is displayed correctly inside the double quoted string. So dealing with T in caps and white space is easy. It means that you've used an associative array element inside a double quoted string. Just wrap the array element in curly braces and the problem disappears.